Welcome into After Carmen. I'm Dan Hope, joined by Andy Anders here in Ohio Stadium. And that was a close one for the Buckeyes.
Oh, yeah.
As Ohio State was in serious danger of being upset by the unranked Nebraska Cornhuskers on Saturday, but the Buckeyes managed to survive with a 21-17 win. That's the good news. The bad news, Andy, is the offensive line in its first game without Josh Simmons did not perform well. The running game did not perform well. And as we look ahead to a major test next week against Penn State, there's some very real concerns about this team, particularly starting with that offensive line.
We all know I love some offensive line talk, and I think you felt it throughout the offensive line reverberate, the injury to Josh Simmons. We talked about it earlier this week on Real Pod Wednesdays. When you lose a key piece of an offensive line, it's not just that you're downgrading that position. It's such an interconnected position group that it starts to have a ripple effect across all five positions, across the entire offense. And I think you really felt that going from a guy who was probably going to be an All-American in Josh Simmons to Zen Mahalski. Hope for the best for him after he got injured at the end of that game. I saw him in crutches on the sideline for Ohio State there in the fourth quarter. But that aside, did not play well in this game. Really looked like, just a lot of pass blocking lapses, a lot of run blocking lapses. He was beat handily on several plays that looked like it sped up Will Howard. And the entire offensive line, the team struggled to run the football. I mean, this was a team that the last rushing performance they had against Oregon was their worst of the season. It was 4.3 yards per carry, 2.1 yards per carry today. And just not that cohesion, and it was clear how big a step back this offensive line took. And the concern of it is, like you said, Penn State next week is going to be one of the best D-lines they play all season with Abdul Carter, with all the things they can do up front and all the things Penn State has done defensively over the past few years. It's one of the biggest strengths of their team, and now clearly the biggest weakness of Ohio State's team is its offensive line as this season goes forward.
And frankly, even if Zen Mahalski hadn't gotten hurt, Ohio State was going to have to reevaluate that left tackle situation. And frankly, I'm a little disappointed that it took an injury for Ohio State to try something different at left tackle, because we heard all week about the contingency plans on the offensive line, and it was clear it wasn't working. And granted, I'm not saying they should have taken Zen out after one or two bad series, but it was a problem the entire game, and I would have liked to have seen Ohio State go to its backup plan, which we learned because of Zen's injury was playing Donovan at left tackle and Luke Montgomery at left guard a little earlier, just to see if you would get better results. Now, granted, maybe they would have been more inclined to experiment if they weren't having to play to win the game in the fourth quarter. But you go into next week, I mean, that left tackle position remains a massive, massive question mark. And, the concern of it is, every team has bad games, but Josh Simmons isn't coming back this year. If this isn't something, it's a 1 or 2 week thing. It's something they have to deal with the rest of the season. And, we knew going into the year, Josh Simmons might be the most indispensable player on this team. I now feel confident saying he was the most indispensable player on this team. But this team is too talented to let one injury derail its season. And that came very close to happening out here today. If Ohio State's defense does not make the two stops that Ohio State needed in the fourth quarter, we would be talking right now about Ryan Day being on the hot seat. We would be talking about a team that was out of a Big Ten championship race and had severely, put a dent in its college football playoff hopes. Now, the good news again for Ohio State is that didn't happen. All their goals are still in front of them, but you go into next week now at Penn State. A win's a win, a loss, but I come out of this game feeling far more pessimistic about Ohio State than I did last week's game, even though Ohio State won this game. Because this is a Nebraska team that lost 56-7 last week. And granted, we both thought Nebraska was better than what it showed last week against Indiana, but this is also not a team that should have taken Ohio State to the brink. Ohio State shouldn't have needed an interception with 1:16 left in the game to seal victory. And again, every team has clunkers, but when you've had 2 weeks to prepare, when you are coming off a loss, when you're saying, this team is angry, and Ryan Day said it in a skull session. He said, it's about actions this week. It's not about words. Well, the actions. I mean, again, you did win the game, but we've heard him say leave no doubt. I mean, this is the second game in a row now where Ohio State certainly left a lot of doubt. And frankly, if Ohio State does not play better next week, it will lose to Penn State. To be more specific, if Ohio State's offensive line does not play better next week, Ohio State will lose to Penn State.
Yeah, the action spoke pretty quietly on offense to that day quote. And, as it pertains to left tackle, Zed Michalski, just based on the fact that he was on crutches, based on the way that injury looked, I wouldn't expect him to play next week. We didn't get any firm answer on that from Ryan Day post-game, and obviously that's still going to be evaluated. We also didn't get a firm commitment that the long-term solution without Zed now is to slide Donovan out and play Luke Montgomery at left guard. Day wasn't very committal to that, said that was their plan to get them out of the game. It was the contingency plan, but they're going to evaluate what they do at left tackle moving into next week. And so it creates more confusion where you already weren't really settling in with Zinn, and I also wanted to see them switch it up sooner. I get even giving Zinn a half in a series, but as it was just so clear throughout the game that he wasn't holding up to what is a pretty good Nebraska defense in a pass rush, but you need quality of left tackle play, or at least competent left tackle play, to get what you're going to need to get out of this offense moving forward. And so, like you said, I think you feel less confident coming off of this win than you did coming off of the Oregon loss, just because this Nebraska, I feel like Nebraska, you could make an argument Nebraska should have won this game with better play out of Dylan Raiola today. I felt there were multiple plays where Ohio State defensive backs fell down, and Nebraska could have hit big throws or touchdowns, and Dylan just overshot his man. And you get some of those plays back if you're Nebraska. We could be having that Ryan Day on the hot seat conversation, all of those things. Now, them's the breaks, right? And Ohio State did what it needed to win the game in the end. And I don't want to go the whole length of the episode without saying that the defense did play really well today. I thought they were excellent, not just those final two drives, but I think after a lot of the conversation that was had the last 2 weeks about the pass rush not getting there and not being schemed up well enough, they did a lot of different things. There was a beautiful third down stop they got where it was a 3-2-6. They showed a blitz to one side, and then simulated pressure just brought four guys, but it got home, and it was just a short completion on the screen pass that went nowhere. Thought the plan of attack was pretty good for what Nebraska tried to do in the screen game overall. Good red zone defense. They got a lot of stops today, and obviously the stops they needed at the end more than anything. So wanted to give a lot of credit to the defense, the way that the defensive front responded in getting after the quarterback. But overall, just a lot of questions about what this offensive line can play at. Is it going to be good enough to go on the road and beat Penn State next week?
This is kind of where we were at going into this season. We kind of thought we were going to be saying Ohio State's defense can win most games for them, but is its offensive line going to be good enough to win those big games? But obviously at Oregon, it was a different story where, the offense was good enough to win that game, if you exclude that the last drive not working out. I mean, you can firmly put the Oregon loss on the defense of how the defense played in that game. If Ohio State had lost this game today, it would have not been the defense's fault. It was not a perfect game for the defense by any means, but the offense didn't do much to help. I know one of our guys mentioned after the game, if you don't include the kneel downs, Ohio State ran 44 plays on offense in this game. That's not very many. And so the defense was out there a lot. They only gave up one touchdown. They were putting a lot of short fields in this game because Ohio State went an entire quarter without getting a first down in the third quarter. And so they kept giving Nebraska the ball back in good field position. And you got to give Nebraska's kicker credit. Nebraska had come into today's game. It did not have a field goal longer than 21 yards on the season. He made, a 54-yarder and a 46, 47-yarder. So, he had a great game. Ohio State's kicker did not have a great game as his one field goal attempt went way right. It kind of looked like a Joe Bauserman ball from when Ohio State played Nebraska 13 years ago. And so, that's something too. We had just talked about it 2 weeks ago about, Ohio State, if they had been in position to potentially kick a game-winning field goal, but that was pretty much the same yardage that kick would have been if they had gotten the timeout after the Will Howard slide. And so, you don't really know how much you can trust him right now either, going into a big game against Penn State next week. And so, definitely some concerns out there. But I do agree with you. Like we should give the defense its due, because this is the second game in a row where Ohio State needed its defense to come up with stops in the fourth quarter. And one of the big narratives over the last 2 weeks was the fact that in big games, Jim Knowles' defenses had not delivered in the fourth quarter. They did today, and to your point, I think the pass rush scheme was a lot more creative today. It's still a work in progress. I mean, I think something that continued to be an issue today, I think particularly in the first half of this game, was allowing Dylan Raiola to step up through the pocket, much like with Dylan Gabriel a week before. I mean, he had a 38-yard run today. He hadn't had a run of longer than 15 yards before today. And so the defense is still a work in progress. I mean, I think if I was giving the defense a grade for today's game, I'm probably giving them like somewhere in the B+ range, because this is a Nebraska team that scored 7 points against Indiana. They scored 14 points against Rutgers. So, I don't know that I'm quite giving this defense an A for what I think it's capable of being, but they did win the game for Ohio State today unequivocally, because, the offense did not play well enough. Ohio State needed its defense to win the game today. It got that done with Jordan Hancock, making the game-stealing interception. And, he's one guy I think in particular deserves credit today, because he was playing a different position than he usually plays. They moved him to safety with Lathan Ransom being out. He was playing that safety position when he made that game-stealing interception. So I think he's one guy in particular. Cody Simon as well had 3 tackles for loss in today's game. I think they were 2 guys in particular who really led that defensive effort today.
Yeah, especially I think Jordan, even before that interception, had just had a great game overall, playing deep, patrolling and cleaning up on a few plays. There was a couple of runs where he had to sweep on the back end. But to your point about Dylan Raiola, the same as last game with Dylan Gabriel, being able to step up in the pocket, I think a lot of that comes down to rush lane discipline with Ohio State's defensive tackles. When you rush the quarterback, it's this delicate balance of, yes, you want to get aggressive, get past your guy, get pressure on him. But if you get out of the gap you're supposed to be in, everyone has an assignment. Like, if I'm looking at you, I'm the quarterback, I'm the defensive tackle, there's a spot on you I'm supposed to aim. And so you have to stay on that trajectory. And if a defensive end gets out of it, that's when you see someone scramble outside. And when you see a defensive tackle get out of it, or interior rushers, Ohio State was blitzing linebackers and even dropping defensive tackles into coverage on some plays today. You have to maintain that rush lane. And so that's where I think you get some of these issues that look like they got corrected a little bit in the second half. I also think sometimes when you're playing defensive ends at defensive tackle in certain pass rush situations, it becomes harder to maintain those gaps. Although Ohio State did less of that today. Saw Tyleik Williams on some third downs. I liked that a lot, because I think Tyleik's a really good pass rusher. And they let him get on the field in some obvious passing downs and rush the passer. So definitely some tweaks that I liked. I think the one thing I'll say where the defense had issues is because they went more aggressive in this game, more creative blitzes, more creative fronts, moving in and out of some things. I think they gave up some big plays, which is, sort of that 2022 defensive vibe for Ohio State, right? Where, they were willing to surrender some big plays to then make big plays themselves, get more stops. Didn't have any turnovers in this game until the very end, but that is where I think this defense is trying to figure out the balance between those two extremes, because against Oregon it seemed too vanilla, too conservative at times, not dialing it up in a way that was putting your rushers in the best scenarios. And then today you give up a few big plays. Defense again overall played great, but you gave up a few big plays because I think you were trying to get more aggressive in response to that. So this defense needs to find the right balance of those things moving forward, because they might have to keep Ohio State in some games if the offensive line keeps playing like that.
Well, it sure is going to be an interesting game next week in State College. We will both be there at Beaver Stadium for Ohio State's top 5 showdown with Penn State, assuming both teams stay in the top 5. I mean, we'll see. Ohio State, I would think Ohio State will stay in the top 5, but, not the most impressive performance here today. Penn State, of course, playing Wisconsin tonight, so they've got to survive that game against the Badgers. But either way, massive game next week. We will be there. Lots more coverage to come on 11warriors.com, so please follow us over there, and we'll catch you next time.